when we're connecting, collaborating, growing together, being better together. If we stay in our own bubble, there's stagnation that occurs. And then, like, I don't know, you can look at people who are in a box and there's lack of motivation and lack of passion. And when you see people on fire, like you, when I look at you, I'm like, gosh, she's passionate about all the things. And you can see people who love the work that they're doing and the way they were gifted in it. And so, yeah, it's interesting. And I truly believe the more that we put ourselves out there, that's gonna, God's gonna honor that. That's gonna gravitate towards us. The more we are generous with our things, and the more we steward our finances and our resources and our talents well, like, that's going to come back tenfold. Welcome to the Moxie podcast. I am excited you guys are here. I feel like I say that every week, but it is true. I love this community and what it's developed into. And I'm excited to have Melina here with Storymakers. We're going to share a lot of really fun stuff, but we are still in the month about all about conscious collaboration, what it means to do that and do that really well. So welcome to the podcast.
Yay. Thank you, Jenny. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited and happy to meet all of the Amani community.
Yes. Yeah. So it's super cool because I feel like a lot of people that come on the podcast, I really never get to meet them in person, but we're about to meet each other several times
Yeah.
in the coming month and in person. And that makes me so thrilled. And so before we get into any of the goodness of just our friendship and just what it's cultivated into, I would love for you to share with our listeners just who you are and what you feel like you are best known for.
Ooh. Well, I'm Melina. People call me Mel, and I'm originally from Arizona, so I'm from the West, but I've been living in New York for about 18 years now. And I love being in New York because all the different types of people are here. My husband has two churches, and my background is in behavioral health. I've always cared about families and how we're operating as are we functioning well? Is this going well? I don't know. So I love being part of that process. And in that, I founded what is called Storymakers. And so we create ways for kids and grown-ups and teens to integrate their feelings and emotions alongside understanding God's big story and that God's for them all the time. So those are kind of the highlights. I have two kids. I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. So I'm in the teen zone, which I love. And it's so fun and exciting. So, that's Mel in a nutshell.
That was good. Mel in a nutshell. Do you do that often or did that just flow today?
It's just one
Just
word.
Mel in a nutshell. That is okay. So there's so much to kind of unpack there, but will you share when kind of Storymakers began and your heartbeat behind it, or maybe the gaps that you felt yeah, were there, and why you even kind of stepped forth into that journey?
Yeah, I've always, like I said, I cared about families and whether they're connecting well or not. And, when I started having kids here in the city, decided I was going to stay home, but I'm such a busybody. So I started doing youth and family work at our church because like it's really important. So we created something called Creative Arts Camp. And I realized I was really able to gather up grown-ups who didn't have kids, but cared about kids and cared about narrative and story. And we created these immersive experiences, which are really epic and fun. They still go on. It's a free camp here in New York. And out of that, I just thought, well, how can we make the stories alive and have kids embody the stories in real life, outside of camp, outside of sort of the mountaintop experience? And so that's where the idea of Storymakers came out of. I thought, well, God's the ultimate story maker, and we're integrated into God's story, and we get to create and be story makers too. And I love art. We believe that art is the back door to the heart. It's a way to build connection. It's a way to, stay connected with folks, especially when it's tough with our kids and when we're in power struggle with them or with our teens. I worked in behavioral health in my 20s, and I would have clients who teachers in schools would say, like, you'll never connect with that kid. He's really tough. You're never going to we're not getting anywhere with them. So I would always engage with art and creative activities, and that always bridged a gap. And so I identified like this place where I was like, art can really connect people in a way that is that allows them to have vulnerability and honesty. And so all that kind of meshed up. God is so wild. And so I love your story too, Jenny. It's like you don't know what's happening while you're
No,
in the thing. And so when I
you
look
don't.
back, I'm like, oh, I cared about kids, I cared about art. And now we have Storymakers. Obviously, like he was setting this whole path. I could never have pictured it or created it for myself. It just like boom, 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 just following
Mm.
along and connecting with those places that I thought were most meaningful.
I'm curious when that person said that you'll never like mesh with that individual because I feel like I've had, or that kid, I feel like I've
Yeah.
had very like their core memories, when someone's like, that will never happen. Are you the type, well, obviously you pushed through it and you're like, I'm gonna connect with these kids, but was that almost like a little bit of a driver or it kind of just gave you a little bit more motivation to be like, no, I think I can and to find creativity? Or is that just a memory where you're just like, man, there was kind of this before and after moment of how you found that passion? I'm just curious because I
Yeah.
I can think back in moments where I'm like like people are like, "Oh, you'll never be one of them," talking about like my Kenyan community. And as much as I understand that, like I will never, like I come from another culture. There's I feel like this mentality with certain people that's like, I'll never be one of them, or I will never that. So then they just like put a wall, they don't even try to like connect or immerse. And I feel like that's this disconnect that we have in the world, and even especially in America, where it's like we don't even try to even have an open mind or curiosity or understanding, um because we just feel like we assume that we can't connect with certain groups of people or certain areas. And so I don't know, so when I think of conscious collaboration, I'm like,
Yeah.
that's to me, that's where it's a different mindset, because it's like you always are walking into rooms being like, no, I'm going to find a beautiful way to connect on a different level, and although we're very different, we can still connect in different ways. So just curious, that kind of, yeah,
I mean, there's
story.
probably a couple of things that maybe we both have in common. It's like, and generally when someone says I can't do something or it's not gonna, that won't work, I'm like, well, I think it will.
Yeah. I
Um,
think to
yeah,
get to our
excuse
story
me.
of where we are now, I'm like, we both are very strong-willed
I'm
individuals.
like, I think there's a path.
Yeah.
I think the second thing that happens with grown-ups, and we talk about a lot about this in Storymaker world, is Walt Disney used to say, like, as you grow older, your imagination grows flabby over time. And so I used to
Mm,
talk about that in talks with Storymaker stuff. But then I realized I was like, I don't think our imaginations grow flabby. I think they actually just go towards the negative. And so I think as adults, as we grow, we have to be conscious of applying our imagination with a positive intent and the possibilities that God is like going to open pathways and he wants us to be connected. So,
mm.
I think that, and that's why I think is so beautiful with the collaborative work. That's God's heartbeat and his intent for all of us. We're better together in that way. And so I think it is that reconfiguring of the imagination of what is possible, in that positive sense, rather than sort of like, oh, that's not possible. I have a history with this kid, it's sort of written in stone, it's done. It's like, well, actually, like God is so wild. And so there's so many possibilities for there to be connection and, opportunity there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that. It's that kind of it is just a mindset shift and redirection and kind of reframing of what can be. Yeah, and I think it's so important when we're connecting, collaborating, growing together, being better together. If we stay in our own bubble, there's stagnation that occurs, and then like I don't know, you can look at people who are in a box, and there's lack of motivation and lack of passion. And when you see people on fire, like you, when I look at you, I'm like, gosh, she's passionate about all the things. And you can see people who love the work that they're doing and the way they were gifted in it. And so yeah, it's interesting. And I truly believe the more that we put ourselves out there, that's gonna, God's gonna honor that. That's gonna gravitate towards us. The more we are generous with our things, and the more we steward our finances and our resources and our talents well, like that's going to come back tenfold. And I don't know, it's been a joy one to connect with you guys over, gosh, it's been a short time. I feel
Yeah.
like It's been years, but it hasn't. It's been like 6 months, maybe 8 months. I don't know, but I would love to. So I want to talk about that, and just our collaboration, that's going on. And I want to encourage people in this story because I think, one, if you want something, go for it. There's a quote out there that's like just not to be afraid, like have, what is it? I'm butchering it, but it's like, be courageous enough to ask what you want for. I think a lot of times we know what we want, but it's the courage to like go out and ask for it. And I think there's this kind of two sides of social media. There can be obviously cons of it, and there's a lot of pros of connection if we use it for actually what its intent is supposed to be used for. And so Mel, her colleague Jackie reached out to me, and it was so awesome because she was pretty persistent. I think it took her like the second or third time before I finally was like, "Oh, what is this?" And I need to answer, just because that's what tends to happen sometimes on messages. But reached out, and it was so cool for the beginning of her just sharing about Storymakers and y'all's heartbeat, and then wanting to partner with Amani and us being able to come up with some really creative things together.
Yeah, we just love it. I mean, yeah, Jackie well, I was already aware of Amani as a product, Money
Yeah.
Kids, love all the products. And then Jackie, my colleague was like, oh, I'm going to reach out. Like, why not? Like, we are so aligned. She's like, I just have a sense. So it's like, okay. And she's super right. And it is that, like, take the risk. Why not? And why not ask? Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? So,
Yeah.
good job,
So
Jack.
yeah, she did awesome. One of my favorite things is collaborating with people to make like their visions come alive. And so I think the first and foremost like assumption that people make about Amani Collective, but specifically Amani Kids, is that we only do what you see like on our website. And so when people reach out to in like curiosity and want to discover like what can be, like Jackie did, it was like, yeah, like let's create with you and do all of these things. So I remember our first conversations is having all of these ideas of, what we can do, because again, it's very limited to what people see online, and we have a lot of capabilities in the back end. But so when I'm curious, because I don't actually know this, have you guys always had, well, we'll talk about our product because that's fun and it's coming up next month, and you guys get to learn more about it. But have you guys always in your curriculum with Storymakers talked about like feelings and emotions? Or is this like a specific like thing that you're putting out just this in the last year?
Yeah, no, it's part of our DNA for sure.
Okay.
Because I just realized when you're in a church or any sort of community, a family is a very small version of a community, and a church is a bigger version. And there's always opportunity, I think, to increase like social emotional connection and awareness. And so in all of our materials, there's a hint of social emotional connection. So in every chapter, every adventure, there's a touch there. We want people to, be more aware that kids have big feelings and small feelings, and that they know that they can take them to God. And so it's part of the scaffolding of Storymakers. And so the work that we're getting to do with Amani is so fun because it's like forefront of the behind the scenes of the zines. And we're just like right out with it, with all the big feels, and so that kids can have a tactile way to touch and feel like, oh, I feel this way, without having to articulate it verbally. And this is going to be great for kids who are nonverbal. This is going to be great for grownups who have a hard time articulating their own feelings, so that there's just more awareness and connection. So I'm so excited for, I think, the way in which this is going to impact the whole family.
Yeah, I'm like cracking up because I want to buy like I want to buy them all for my team. So when we start Zoom meetings, they just like put
Yeah,
up
you have
the
a warning.
wording, like put up the feeling that they have. So to give you guys, if you guys are listening and if you're watching, we created really like little emoji plush pillows from there's a big feeling. Okay. If you're watching on the screen right now, here's another one. And so this is actually being launched in the next couple weeks, March 15th, correct?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So we will put a link for Storymakers in the show notes because you guys really need to be watching out for it. We're going to be doing a countdown on our social Automani kids, but it's something that is so good. Like Mel said, for family, for kids. My middle child, she gets really anxious. And so there's parts of where like if she had these to just like point to or hold up, like because sometimes I feel like kids just don't have the words or they're overwhelmed, with what's going on. But seriously, if you want to enhance your culture at your workspace, buy
Yeah.
these for your team because I think they're so great. And just like to hold up to hold up
Full
the
time.
feelings
Yeah.
the whole
And
time.
on, one of our free resources in our blog is that we have emotional prayer wheel. So, oh, and yeah, that's going to be something coming up with Amani too. So keep an eye
Yes.
for that. That's a great resource too, because there's ways to pray through these feelings. It's like they become overwhelming and you feel like maybe I can't get out of it. I mean, one of the things we're hoping that families are able to do is build resiliency, right? And so they can
Mhm.
track, they can look back and say, hey, yesterday I was really anxious, but today I feel chilled. Like that's great because when I'm feeling overwhelmed, maybe something new is going to come along the way and I don't have to be defined by one big feeling all the time.
Mhm.
So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see how it all rolls out.
Yeah. So if you are listening, the emotional prayer wheel went out yesterday. So again, we'll put that in the notes. You guys can find that. And then yes, in a couple weeks, March 15th, the product will launch and it will launch on Storymakers NYC, their site. So we'll have a link to it. So just be watching out for that because we're really excited that we could partner with you guys in this and make the emotions come to life. It was so cool to see our team in Kenya like making them and just like because they just wear joy on their sleeve. So like when they're making them in the face that they're making, not that like when they were making the angry face, they were angry, but it was just so cool to see them really excited about like this really fun project and all the different colors because it did, we are always consistently trying to build and challenge our team as well. And so there were a lot of colors that we worked with and I was really proud of them for there was just a slight few changes we had to make in the beginning, but they did pretty well with matching those colors.
Amazing. We did
Um,
9 different colors. And
yeah,
I will say, like, a shout out, we're really intense about the art. So you guys did such a great job. It was amazing. They feel exactly
thanks.
the way we imagined. So that's
That's that makes my heart so happy. Yeah. Okay, so I am curious. I'm going to like turn the conversation a little bit on the journey of story makers and this might actually be really hard and I did not prep you for this question, but I never prep anybody for any questions here. So we just do it
roll with
straight.
it.
We roll with it and literally Val who does all the we're going to give a shout out to Val. She does all the edits. We don't really make a lot of edits. So if you say something silly,
That's
be
fine.
careful on the Moxie podcast. Um, but I'm curious. This is a hard question for me to answer too sometimes. But when you're looking at the journey, what would you say is kind of your greatest accomplishment that has happened so far? And then also maybe just a lesson that you've learned, whether that's in something that failed or something that was really hard. Yeah, I'd be curious what that is.
Yeah, I mean, I would say just that we still exist in some ways. I
Yes.
just thought, well, okay, I think Storymakers is a thing. I'm not quite sure. And I had a lot of I would say especially it took me like 3 years to be able to really articulate to people like, oh, I'm the executive director. Like I would just say, I
Mhm.
was like, oh, I'm just kind of doing this side project because I didn't want it to not I don't know. I must have been afraid of failure, or that I put myself forward with all of my heart and intent, and then what's going to happen. And I also worry about team, and all the people that work with me and the artists, and so I would say one of my greatest achievements is just being able to say like, hey, I'm the executive director of Storymakers. And
Yeah.
we raise money and we have a team and there's like health and collaboration and we have partners in across the globe. And so those, I think just the articulation of what generally has happened is like a huge win for me. And then I would say at the same time, that's probably been the hardest thing for me to
Mhm.
sort of get around and say like, oh, I'm entrepreneurial and I'm taking a risk. Like I wasn't able to really identify and clarify that for myself.
Mhm.
And so, that I had fears and anxiety around just being sort of in charge of something. And so that's what I would say was like probably the most challenging aspect, because I would meet with people who were ready to donate and support the vision and the mission because they know that how it impact kids. Like kids and families are being impacted by Storymakers. Like there's just no question.
Mhm.
And so being able to, just get behind that with confidence, I think was my biggest challenge.
Yeah. I really like that you mentioned that. I was on Storymakers. What is the name of your podcast? I
It's
should
just
know this.
Storymakers Live,
Storymakers
which is not true. It's not live.
Storymakers Live,
Maybe it
not.
was like,
But
yeah, it's a
we
good one.
recorded twice. It's a good episode. We'll link that episode because it is good. I loved the episode. I loved being on that side. And I remember like us leading up to that, like us talking about one, the nature of still being here, because I think for small businesses in the last couple years, it's just been heartbreaking to see people shut down or have to close their doors. And and just seeing that come to an end, especially on my side in the artisan space. I've just seen it over and over again of just like, they're not necessarily being enough conscious consumerisms or people even understanding what that means or strategy, all of those we could go into a whole nother thing. So I think the fact of just existing is good. But I also like that you mentioned like wearing that hat, because I feel for me too, like there was a point, especially in our model, and like, and I think I shared this with you too. Like
Mhm.
being an executive director, I think I was kind of comfortable with it, but it was still hard to be like, okay, I'm running this ship, and what does this mean? But then like moving into like also like you're saying in that entrepreneurial spirit and being like, okay, like I'm running this and I need to do it with some sort of strategy and like being confident in wearing those hats well, um, is a lot. It takes a lot of courage to step and be the leader of it. Like we can be the leader of it behind a keyboard, but when we're presenting ourselves and when we're, in front of people, and I would say the thing too that I'm sure a lot of our listeners struggle with, especially if you're in a nonprofit space or even within your closing sales, is actually closing those donations and sales, because I think we try to be nice about it a little bit in the front end of
Yeah.
like, let me tell you my story and trying to hint at, I want you to
Wouldn't it
donate.
be nice if you thought maybe I want to sort of buy something?
Right, exactly. So even getting confident in the ask of those different things, I think it takes time and courage to like, and that practice of being like, it's okay to like come out and do, I think there's a difference between being completely cold versus like our nature of like being genuine and authentic and like truly just wanting people to align with us in the best way, and find that. But I do love that you shared it because it's so simple, but it is such an accomplishment. And
Yeah,
you're here. And I'm
I
so happy.
we're
I'm
still
so
here,
happy.
we're still around. Yeah, no, I mean, it's all of those things of just owning that confidence of like, oh, okay. Well, and it's trusting what God has put before you too, in some ways, right?
So
Because
true.
I think that's if it were just me and all up to me, then I don't know what this would be. But
Yeah.
it's trusting that he made the path behind me and he's making the path before me, right? And like stepping into that. And it's like, oh, I can be the executive director because I know the path is being set before me. And that may be it may have hurdles, it may be smooth, it's always going to
Mm,
be changing, but I'm never going to be alone. And
mm.
it's going to be not totally my story on my own, but God's story.
Yeah. No, that's so good. What would you in the like in this total journey, what would in as what you shared as well? I'm curious, like well, I kind of alluded to it, but um like your biggest, I mean, you shared like you're here, but like your biggest lesson? Like if you're, this is my last question, but I'm going to say it and then we're going to circle back because I'm leading to it. But what, if you were to give someone like your inspiration, like one last thing to live by, which I normally end our interview there, but we're not ending quite yet, Mel. What would be the one last thing to live by, that lesson that you would share?
I would say winning is in losing, because in the losing of sort of your ego and your pride, it's hard to trust people and to trust people with your things. So that's either your team or the people you're fundraising with. But I think the losing, like humility and having humility in that process, is actually where you are really winning. And so I don't think it's intuitive and that it doesn't feel totally comfortable, but that's where really like the connection and the strides really happen in that space. So I would say winning is in the losing. And the same is true for parenting with littles and all, I mean, teens and all of it. It's like not, getting into a control power struggle and hoarding, but the winning is in the losing.
Mm, thanks for sharing that. Okay, I want people to be able to connect with you. So one, what would be, I feel like there's several ways. One, you can donate. Everybody, you can
Yeah.
donate. So we're gonna throw that out there. Go donate to an amazing cause. Two, um, yeah, how can people get your resources? Where can they find you? And what is also an ideal, as we're talking about conscious collaboration, I would love people to know it's more than just their individual purchase. So also my like third, fourth, fifth question, I don't know how many questions I just threw at you. How can people, what's a kind of, what does that collaboration look like? Or what are some partnerships that you do that might be a little larger scope?
Yeah, no, it's, when people give to Storymakers, you're, supporting artists, you're supporting the creators behind Storymakers, but you're also resourcing kids like across the globe and teens. So we're doing a partnership with the Mani kids. So we've had some kids in Kenya enjoying Storymakers. We have a big partnership in Mexico. We are translating materials so that it's available to kids across Mexico. And then we have a partnership with Amistad that we're building, and that's based in Bolivia. And so there are just so many wonderful opportunities. So when people walk alongside Storymakers, you're supporting kids and teens who none of us will actually ever meet, but it's that faith, putting that faith forward, and trusting that God's story is a big story and that we're offering them, just giving them the goods. So that's what I would say. That's, when you're partnering with Storymakers, it's not just us in New York City. It's like kids and teens across the globe and kids across the country. We're in 40 different states. And so it's really exciting. In some ways, I love not knowing all the kids that we'll ever connect to. It's just like, oh,
Yeah.
that's city.
I always love thinking about like our ripple. I'm also on my weird researcher side. I want to be able to quantify a ripple one day. So that's my legacy like research project is like, how do I quantify someone's ripple of impact? But I love to think about that because like there's just so many things we won't know until like we're face to face with God, right? And then we can see like, oh my gosh, just because I was nice to that person one day, like look at what happened. Or just like all the little things, right? That we just don't even know that we see our big things that we do and we can say, oh wow, we did this and Storymakers did this and Amani did this, but there's so many little things in the big things that I think just get unrecognized. And I'm just so, I don't know, I'm thrilled to see that like highlight reel of like, what that happened? And just to be like so utterly surprised at like his goodness and his faithfulness and his vastness, right? Like, and that I love how you mentioned too earlier, like he's always there and like us trusting the process, like he has the plans in front of us. And I love that I know he's constant and he's there. So that's awesome. There's
Yeah.
so many kids you will not know. And that's the beauty of a ripple and of impact. And I encourage all of you guys to check out, there's going to be a lot in the show notes. So go check out all those things. Put a timer on your phone right now for March 15th to go to Storymakers NYC. What's your website? Storymakers,
Mike.com.
storymakersnyc.com. March 15th, those amazing emotion, are we calling them plushies? What are we calling them?
Pillows.
Pillows. Everyone calls them something different. I call them like pillows most of the
Yeah.
time. Some people call them plushies. I'm like, they're not necessarily plushies, but they're amazing emotions. So put that in your calendar. Like I mentioned earlier, yesterday we launched the prayer wheel. So you can actually find that at amanikids.com under our blog section, and you can have access to that. So we'll have all that information there. But Mel, thank you so much for joining the Moxie community and being here today.
Anytime. I just love being here, and I'm just so excited for all the amazing work you all are doing, because I think one of the core things that is so human and so amazing to offer people is like dignity. And I think that you
Mm.
and your team offers so much dignity to anybody that it touches. So thank you.
Thank you. I receive that. That means a lot. That really does. And one day you will come see us in person. So
Yeah.
I'm holding you to that. I'm throwing that your way. But as always, community, thank you so much for being here, and Moxie on.